Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. We are back again looking at hidden gems for the PlayStation 1. This time we're taking a look at 10 games beginning with the letter I, so get ready for some incredible, irate and interesting games. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button and we take a look at some games. Let's start with one that you may actually already know. This is In the Hunt from Xing and Irem. This is an awesome 2D shooter which is often called a Metal Slug of the Sea, and you know what, that's pretty damn spot on, and you could easily tell people this was a spin-off of that series, and I for one would believe it. So yeah, it's a side-scrolling shooter where you take control of a submarine and you spend your time blowing the shit out of anyone and anything you see, mainly boats, mechs and other submarines. The graphics here are incredible, with some amazing 2D sprite work packed with awesome animation that brings everything to life. There's always so much going on, with enemies above and below water all on a mission to blow you to smithereens. Luckily, you have an unlimited supply of rockets, depth charges and whatever the opposite of those are that go upwards. You'll need to have laser focus here in order to get anywhere, as there are so many enemies at all times, and it can be hard to avoid their attacks as you are pretty large on the screen, and the general amount of crap happening all over the place, it can get very confusing. Thankfully, pretty much all the enemy attacks can be shot down, which really helps. You'll need to spend your time assessing where everything is too, as you might need to surface in order to use certain weapons against helicopters or things outside of the water. Each level has a massive boss for you to contend with too. These always have a ton of attacks that you'll need to learn, and you'll need lightning fast reflexes here. This really is a fantastic package, and speaking of fantastic packages, shout out to Toby and Goobs on the Secret Levels podcast. The game has great graphics, especially with explosions which are just amazing, solid responsive controls, and a harsh but fair difficulty that will keep you coming back again and again. You can even play this one in 2-player co-op. I'd say this is a must-own for the system. Next is Inuyasha, the Feudal fairy tale, and sorry if I got that wrong. It's a 2D one-on-one fighting game that's all based on various fairy tales, but in a very Japanese way. The story is that a fox bloke has been broken free after being trapped for loads of years and now has to go around fighting people, or something along those lines. When you're playing the story mode, you have just 2 characters to choose from initially. Then you're put on a map screen where you choose where to go, and you'll either fight a battle or take part in a minigame. The fights are just one round here, and you have a bit of story before and after each one to let you know why you're kicking people's asses. Also, you'll notice that some characters have pictures of crystals by their health. During the fights, if you use the correct special move, you can actually knock these crystals off of them and collect them yourself. If you get enough of them before beating the final boss, you use them to unlock a new character who then can be played in story mode. I really like this mechanic, and the game does tell you how many crystals you need and which one of your special attacks you need to do in order to get them. This is pretty good. Now, if you cast your mind back way back when, you remember that I said there's also mini-games here. These come in a few flavours, but essentially all of them consist of hitting things. If you complete the objective within the time limit, you get more crystals. These minigames are optional though, and if you just want story, then just head to one of the characters on the map screen instead. The game looks pretty good with some excellent 2D sprites and animation, and there's some really good cutscenes between levels which is always welcome. There's also a lot of voice work, but it's all in Japanese. The controls here are decent, but can take a bit to get used to. You've got 3 attack buttons, a weak attack, a strong attack and a special button. You hammer the weak and strong button to do combos, and there's even Street Fighter style inputs that you can do for special moves and super moves. Pressing X is your parry button. Time this right and you'll stagger your opponent, leaving them open for attack. It's well worth getting used to this, especially on the higher difficulties. There's a few game modes outside of the story. You can of course do one-on-one battles against the CPU or another player, and I think the simple pick up and play mechanics would make this a good one for people who aren't that into fighting games. I had a good bit of fun with this one, and you know what? You might too. Next up is Imadoki no Vampire Bloody Bride, and this here is one of those visual novel dating sim type games that the kids are playing these days. The story is that you're a dweeby young vampire bloke and it's time for you to go bang some hot human girls and of course suck their blood as well. Now, as this is a visual novel type game, pretty much the whole thing is reading and looking at anime pictures of hot women. Normally this isn't really my kind of game, and I'll be honest, this one didn't do much to change that, but I know there's a lot of people out there that like them, and I don't know when I'd ever get to talk about a game like this in a video. So I thought, screw it. Which, yes, is in fact the entire aim of this game. You'll wade through a ton of text, which has even been translated, and you'll talk to various girls that you'll meet as the story progresses, trying to bang them. You can also explore the town, and you'll have to travel around to buy gifts and have battles at times when you're brutally murdering innocent people to suck their blood. The game is broken up into days, and you have a limited amount of time in the human world to find the women of your dreams. You can level up and increase your stats every day, which makes you better at talking to girls, and in some cases more appealing to certain ones, and that's kind of the point. You'll need to choose what to go for, and you'll need to find out everything you can about the girls, so you have a better understanding of what personality you need and what type of answers you want to give them when you're talking. It's pretty realistic, to be honest. You also have some hot demon women you can summon to spy on the girls you meet. They'll dig up information on what they've been doing and what they seem to like to help you on your way. Honestly, there's not really much else I have to say about this one. It's a visual novel dating sim. You read a lot and choose from a bunch of options on the menu every now and then. Personally, I didn't find any of the characters particularly great, though I am playing the game with a fan translation as the game never officially left Japan, so some of the conversations are a little bit wonky, but overall they did a pretty good job. If you're into this sort of thing, then you might enjoy it. Otherwise, avoid it like a lump of garlic. Let's have a proper adventure now with In Cold Blood, a 3D action-adventure game that clearly takes its inspiration from things like James Bond and the Metal Gear games. Here you are a British spy infiltrating a foreign base looking for a fellow spy who went in undercover and has gone missing. Of course, there's plenty of twists and turns along the way too. This is actually a really interesting game that has a very good mix of exploration, stealth, action and interacting with other characters in order to find items and solve puzzles. It plays a bit like Resident Evil, with a fixed camera angle and tank controls, but you also have a punch, shoot, crouch, run and interact button, so you can do loads here. Most of the game will see you wanting to use stealth, as ammo is limited and you die in just a few shots, but you can sneak up to enemies and knock them out in just one punch, which is very handy. But if things do go too wrong, you can whip out your gun and fill them with hot lead thanks to a generous auto-aim system that is very handy. The game looks okay, the backgrounds are all fantastic, but the character models aren't the best, and the animation is a little choppy and jerky in places. It also translates to controls, which are fine and you can work with them, but they're stiff and quite clunky. However, the game is still very playable. You'll meet plenty of characters as you play, and you'll need to have conversations with as many as you can in order to get hints as to where your mates were last seen and how you might be able to get into a new area of the base. What's also cool is that you actually reference conversations you had with other people further in the game to other characters. This comes in handy here, as there could be a guard that you need to get by, and you can talk to him and hark back to a conversation you had with someone earlier. It might even just be something about football, or something silly like that, or the fact that someone told you something was broken elsewhere in the game, and it means that person trusts you and lets you in. If you hadn't done this, you might actually have to just fight that person instead, and it's a really cool mechanic that works pretty well. There is a lot of trial and error involved though, so make sure you do save often, as if you say the wrong thing or just walk past the wrong person, then you're probably going to be dead. It actually took me longer than it should have done to realise that this really is a game that you don't rush. You've got to take your time and play it slowly. Try to avoid combat where possible and plan your route around the rooms that you're in. The game doesn't look the best and the controls are a bit janky, but I really found this one an engaging game with some great characters and some very original ideas, and this is well worth checking out if you like a bit of espionage. Time to get wacky now with Incredible Crisis, which is actually one of my favourite games for the system, and I've owned it for years. This is a very Japanese game, but was released everywhere. You play as the Teneo family who go through an average day, and of course an average day in Japan consists of crumbling workplaces, alien invasions, kaiju, bank robberies and shrinking to the size of an ant, and more of course, which from what I know is the average day in Japan. Every level is essentially its own minigame with its own controls and objectives to complete. There's no way I can go through them all, but some of the highlights here are dance routines, shooting down rockets heading for a spaceship, escaping giant insects in a garden, and snowboarding away from bank robbers after thwarting their heist. It's all mad, and the game is genuinely funny, and you'll really love the Teneo family, who are just an average family and really likeable. You play as every member of the family, and the cutscenes, which are all very well done, always show how their days are interconnected. The graphics here are fantastic, with great animation and a surprising amount of detail. The sound and music are the real highlight as well, with crazy screams and an awesome ska soundtrack that plays throughout the game. The controls here are the trickiest thing about it though, as every level does have its own set of rules and often different controls, everything is mixed up. And some of the controls do better than others, and at times it does seem like there's a bit of lag, though I was never sure if this was a deliberate choice to make the game just that bit more challenging. And the game is very challenging. Even though it's just quirky mini-games, they do last quite a while, and are definitely not easy. It's unlikely you'll beat most of them on your first try. Some will take a good amount of practice, and you need to try them a few times to really understand what you need to do. Thankfully, you can save after every few games, and you can replay any of them that you've completed at any point from the menu screen. This is always nice. Some of the games do go on for a bit too long for my liking, especially when you're travelling somewhere and they take a good 5 or 6 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're playing it, it does feel like ages. However, the game is an absolute blast to play. It's batshit crazy and is actually quite short, but you definitely have a good time playing it. This is a great game to play with a group of friends. Even though it's just a single player game, passing the controller around after each game is a lot of fun. This one is another must-have for the system if you ask me. Everyone's favourite bumbling robot cop, Inspector Gadget, even got a game on the PlayStation. I was expecting a platform game, but here you get one of those block-pushing puzzle games. That evil bastard, the Claw, has created a bunch of gems. I know, what an asshole. So good old Gadget has to go around a bunch of levels pushing the gems together to get rid of them. For some reason, putting 3 of the same gem next to each other makes them turn into coins, so that's exactly what you do. Though it's not as easy as it sounds. As the levels progress, the gems will get scattered all over the level and often are not close together. Also, you can only push and not pull, so if you make a mistake, you're screwed and you have to restart the level. Thankfully, you do get unlimited tries and you can save your game. Also scattered around the levels are keys and items to use. You'll need the keys to open various doors, which often hide new gems, and there's also weapons you can use to stun the enemies on the levels, of which there are a few. Thankfully, none of them really chase you, they just sort of wander around aimlessly and are more of a nuisance than anything. The biggest enemy here though is the timer, which is constantly counting down. It's fairly generous, but there's a lot of levels where it did run out for me and I had to replay the level a few times, but that's kind of the point of the game. Graphically, it's fine. It's all pre-rendered sprites and they look and animate fine. But you can see that it's a budget title as it does all look and feel a little bit cheap, especially with the sound and music, which only sometimes have an Inspector Gadget feel to them, and most of it sounds like it's just stock music. The controls are decent enough though, and they're what you'd expect because it's a simple game, though I did have issues with the collision detection where I'd brush past a gem and I'd accidentally push it when I didn't mean to, and that would mean I'd have to restart the whole level, which was quite annoying. But once you know what you're doing, it's not too much of an issue. Overall, as mentioned, this is clearly a budget game, but I do quite like these puzzle games and found it quite addictive. It does seem like it's one of those games that started off as something else and they just randomly slapped an Inspector Gadget license on in the hope it would help it sell a bit more. But it is kind of fun. If you like puzzle games, you could definitely do worse. Alien invasion time now with Invasion from Beyond. Here you play as one of a few pilots who have to help save humanity from an invasion from beyond, aliens. You choose from a few ships, each with their own stats and weapons, and then you're set out on a ton of really bloody hard missions where you need to rescue civilians, scientists, and destroy alien invaders, and sometimes even capture them. It's actually quite a tricky game to get into, but once you do, it's a lot of fun. The levels are quite small, but they're packed with objectives to do. Your ship has a nice amount of weapons, and by rescuing scientists, you actually unlock more weapons and abilities, which is a nice way to do it. Between levels you can swap out your equipment too, which is very handy, and it's worth playing around with everything you get. One of the main mechanics here is that your ship has the ability to beam up most things. You mostly use this to rescue civilians, who you then have to take and drop off at a safe zone like a church. Then there's the scientists, who you need to take back to your base, and you can even capture alien soldiers that are on the levels, taking them back to your base, and this lets you unlock more tech. It's a really cool idea. As I said, you get a ton of objectives as the levels go on, and none of them are particularly simple. In fact, I had a hard time on pretty much every single level. This is partly because, although your ship controls well enough, it's incredibly fast and can be tricky to shoot down enemies, who will kick your ass, and I could never figure out how to repair my ship either. I'm not actually convinced you can. Thankfully, if you do get shot down, you'll switch to one of the other pilots and carry on the mission. Something that is annoying though is that at times there are things you can do on the level that make you immediately fail the whole mission. For example, in one mission I shot down some aliens I saw, only to find I wasn't meant to shoot them down at that particular moment, and it meant I failed the mission completely and had to restart. All your objectives are radioed in, so make sure you do read them carefully, otherwise you'll be playing a level for 20 minutes only to immediately fail it because you accidentally shot down the wrong thing. I would also recommend fully completing the training and simulation missions to get used to how everything works. Graphically, I really like the way the game looks. It's got a very good B-movie style to it, and everything here is tongue-in-cheek. The music also really suits the game, sounding like something out of a 50s alien film. If you're up for a fun but very challenging game, then definitely check this one out. Time for another fighting game now with Iron and Blood. This one is set in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons universe, which is something I don't really care about, but I do like fantasy, so rock and roll. Anyway, there is a needlessly long and convoluted story here about a bloke trying to get his girl back, but she keeps dying and getting resurrected as someone else, or something along those lines. Eventually, the bad bloke recruits some other bad folk, so likewise a group of good guys team up to fight them. The game is mostly played in team battles, and you'll select a number of characters, of which there is a decent selection of humans, orcs, goblins, skeletons and more. You've got warriors, wizards and everything in between. Though you can only pick teams of either good or bad. It's a bit of a shame you can't mix it up a bit, though it does make sense for the story. This means if the first character you select is a good one, all the other ones you select afterwards have to also be good, and likewise for the bad. Then you're put in a 3D arena where you fight one-on-one until one of the teams has been totally defeated. And I'll be honest, this game is rough. Actually, it's very rough. But there weren't many games beginning with I, and I didn't want to include an International Superstar Soccer game, even though I actually love that series. Anyway, the graphics here are pretty bad, though not the worst I've seen, but the animation is pretty awful, and everything either is way too fast or way too slow. This makes the combat very tough, as if you use strong attacks, you'll almost always get hit by your opponent with a quick attack, and the weak attacks barely do anything at all. Also, the controls themselves are pretty bad and unresponsive. You've got loads of attack buttons of course, but it's very hard to put combos together and the special attacks are impossible to pull off. Of course the computer doesn't have much of an issue in this area, and they're also really tough, blocking almost everything you do. Something that's just a pain is that you don't automatically face your opponents either, so you have to press the shoulder buttons which make you rotate to face them. So if they're behind you, you slowly turn around to face them, and in the meantime they will of course just kick your butt. So yeah, this isn't a good game. I can imagine it being a laugh with some mates round who just want to take the piss out of it, but if you're after a good 3D fighting game, play Evil Zone, which you can find out more about in the Letter E edition of this series, and stay clear of this one. But hey, at least you know it exists now. And actually, you know what? The music here is awesome. So the music for this game is a hidden gem, but the gameplay itself, not so much. Here is Irritating Stick, a stupid game with a stupid name that I really can't decide if I actually like, but I kept coming back to it again and again. It's a simple game. You have to guide a stick through a maze within a time limit without touching anything. It's the same as those metal maze things with buzzers in real life. It's just a video game version of that. And you know what? I do kind of like it. The controls are simple. You just use the D-pad to guide the stick around. You can also change between 5 speeds, 1 being the slowest, 5 the fastest, and you'll need to do this to get past certain obstacles and make it in time. The levels here are all very tough, and you really need to take your time. They're often very narrow with a number of twists and turns, though soon you'll come across moving parts that will really test your skills, and most likely your patience. I have to be honest though, most of the mistakes I made were because I was focusing too much on going as fast as I could rather than taking my time and planning my route. This is really a game where you do have to take your time, and you do actually have more time limit than you would think. Switching between the speeds and making sure you're correctly lined up before heading into corners is very important. It's all very responsive, but the game is unforgiving. You so much as breathe on a wall and you're screwed, so make sure to take your time. I quite like the announcer here. He introduces the obstacles that you come across. This really makes the game feel like you're on a TV show and it never gets annoying. There isn't much music here though, and you'll be hearing the same tracks quite often, but none of them are particularly offensive. There are a few courses to unlock as you play, but overall there aren't actually that many to play on, which is a bit of a shame. I was quite surprised at how much I enjoyed this game. It is very addictive and really has that just one more try quality to it. I actually would recommend checking this one out if you can find it for cheap. And finally for today, let's get spooky with Iru, which I think translates to They're Here. This is a first-person survival horror game that never left Japan, but thankfully it now has a fan translation so us losers in the West can play it. The whole thing is set in a school, and you're setting up for prom night along with some other teachers and a bunch of students, when suddenly a load of strange stuff starts to happen and people get killed off one by an unseen force, until you do see it. So, of course, you have to explore the school that you're now trapped in, trying to stop whatever's happening, find out what's behind it, and escape with your life. Now, I will warn you that this is a very slow-paced game with a ton of dialogue. A lot of the gameplay involves exploring until you trigger a cutscene, and then everything moves on. Though, of course, you have to find items and solve simple puzzles to unlock new areas and progress. There are enemies in the game, but you don't really fight them, you just have to find hiding spots and wait for them to pass by. This creates a lot of tension, but at the same time, it's a shame you can't really defend yourself. You can find items to help you banish away the monsters, but you never actually have any weapons. The game is always played in a first person, and it controls well enough. You can walk and run and interact with almost everything you see. Graphically, it's all fine. It's got some pretty jagged edges on the characters, and the models are actually kind of ropey, but it does the job and actually has a creepy atmosphere to it. The real focus here though is the story, and it is more like an interactive movie, though of course you do control the whole thing. If you're okay getting sucked into an interesting story and don't mind a slower paced game, then this is well worth a look. Just be aware that it does take a while to get going, which is annoying for when you're recording footage, and there is a lot of backtracking. Though the school isn't particularly massive, so it's not a huge deal. But if you like a spooky game, I think this is a good one to try. So there you go, 10 more games for the PS1 that might have flown under the radar for some of you. Which one is your favourite? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, as well as any other hidden gems that you know of. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We have loads of great content for everyone to enjoy, yes, even you. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.